All right, my friends, welcome back to the Weekend Interview Show. I'm Scott Horton, and my next guest is Greg Mitchell. He's the editor of the journal Editor and Publisher. Welcome to the show, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm not doing too bad at all. And now there's a movie that's premiering tonight on the Sundance Channel for those who have, I guess, cable or satellite at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Original Child Bomb. And you helped advise for that movie, is that right?
That's right. It's a film that features footage, which I've written about this past week, that was suppressed by the U.S. for decades. That was the only footage really shot in Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the atomic bombings, and was kept out of view for decades.
Now, we're going to spend most of this half hour on that footage, but I think, first of all, in this first segment, if we can talk about the basic story that the nuking of Japan was absolutely necessary to force their surrender. This is what we all learn as kids, and I actually found a letter that was written to the Smithsonian Institute complaining about some assertions made in their Hiroshima exhibit, and your name was one of the signers on that letter complaining about some of their
Can't hide anything anymore.
No, you can't, not with Google. So is it true, then, that Japan had been attempting to surrender to the United States prior to the dropping of the atomic bombs?
Well, it's a very complicated subject, and I think everyone should look at it and consider it with an open mind. There's a lot of evidence on all sides, I suppose, but you can take just about any position and find some good evidence on your behalf. So it's just a terrific subject to study and make up your own mind. But I mean, basically what happened from what I know, I've looked at this for decades and written a book about it, and been to Japan and interviewed people who dropped the bombs and so forth. So I've done quite a bit of research on this. And what I've come to believe is that basically the Japanese were trying to find a way to surrender very close to when the bomb was dropped, and in fact that their main hang-up was that they be allowed to keep their emperor, but the U.S. was demanding unconditional surrender. After we used the bomb, of course, we then allowed them to keep their emperor. Now, we don't know for sure if we had changed those terms before the use of the bomb, whether it would have made a difference, but the fact is we didn't try it. The other thing that most people do not appreciate today is that the incredible impact that the Soviet Union entering the war the day after the Hiroshima bomb had on the Japanese and would have had on the Japanese. And I think people who, when they do hear about this, they presume that, this was the sneaky Russians. You know, after we dropped the bomb, they suddenly decided to get in on the kill, when in fact we had demanded, and the Soviets had agreed, or weeks before, that they would enter on that date. It had nothing to do with the dropping of the bomb. We didn't know that the bomb was going to be ready then. And so the Russians came in at the same time, and the combination of the bomb and the Russians and just the general state of the Japanese position in the war all combined for the surrender. So again, we don't know if the U.S. had waited another week or 2 weeks or whatever it might have been for the Russians to invade, allowed them out front to keep their emperor, if that would have made a difference. We dropped the bomb instead. So it's a historical quandary right now.
All right, everybody, it's the Weekend Interview Show. We're talking with Greg Mitchell. He's the editor of the journal Editor and Publisher, and he's the co-author of the book Hiroshima in America. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Weekend Interview Show. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Greg Mitchell. He's the editor of the journal Editor and Publisher, available at editorandpublisher.com. And today is the 60th anniversary of Hiroshima. Today's spotlight article on antiwar.com is The Press and Hiroshima, August 6th, 1945, by Greg Mitchell. And it's primarily concerning lost footage, suppressed footage, that has now come back to light. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where this footage has been?
Okay. Well, just be as quick about it as possible. Essentially, right after the atomic bombings in Japan, Japanese newsreel team went and filmed the devastation and the effects on people there, radiation effects and so forth. At the same time, the U.S. military, when they occupied the country, made plans to shoot their own footage, which was going to be in color, which was rather unusual at the time. And they were going to do their own document. They then came across the Japanese shooting their film. They confiscated all that film, the newsreel footage, and eventually locked it up, and it was not released for 25 years. Meanwhile, they shot their own color footage, very extensive, of the devastation and the medical effects, the human effects. And the filmmakers, a couple of whom I met, the director of the whole project, interviewed him, and others, wanted this film released. They thought it would be shown on movie theaters and then later on television. And instead it was declared top secret, classified, and did not emerge for decades. It was not really seen by anyone for almost 40 years. And so essentially what happened was that every frame of film footage that was shot in the two cities was people did not see in this very critical period of history in the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, the atomic tests in the atmosphere, which affected so many people, proliferation around the globe, and so forth. So these images were kept from people.
And now some of this footage is what's going to be airing tonight on the Sundance Channel at 8 Eastern Time. Original Child Bomb is the name of the movie, right?
Right. It doesn't make up the entire movie. It's part of the first part of the movie, and then it comes back later. Parts of the footage have been used in films in the past. Some films are limited. Not that many people have seen them, but this isn't the first time any of it has ever been used. But this may be the most extensive, and it's quite graphic. You really get to see the human effects on people, and of course, this was what the government was afraid of, because they wanted people to think that this was mainly just a bigger bomb that caused devastation, knocked down buildings, and so forth. They didn't really want to have people focusing on the radiation and the other effects, and also the filmmakers in their way were just showing the survivors and the victims, and the vast majority of them were women and children. And in fact, that's in both cities, the overwhelming majority of people who were killed were women and children, civilians. So that, again, was not something the government really wanted out, because the official story was that these were military bases, military cities, and we're killing mainly military people, which was simply not true.
And in your article, you sort of speculate, one of your articles, you sort of speculate that perhaps the course of the Cold War, the course at least of the arms race, may have been different if this footage had come out. I guess the point you just made about, well, they wanted people to think it was a really big bomb, but not all the radiation effects and people who had survived the bomb dying later, that if people had known that history may have really developed in an entirely different course.
Right. Well, again, people knew the cities had been partly destroyed, and people eventually knew about radiation, and of course we had the whole era of the 1950s of the fallout shelters and things like that. But as we saw, even with the fallout shelters, people had this kind of ridiculous view of what this meant. You build this little thing in your basement, and of course you didn't have to worry anymore. It was absurd. And if people had seen the true effects in Japan and the effects on the people, it would have been more vivid in their minds what could happen. And it may have changed. Again, it's hard to say, but certainly people. I guess my point is even if it didn't change a thing, did the American people have a right to know what was done in their name? Did they have a right to know what these new dangers were? Did they have a right to get a full picture of the danger and what we had done? And then they could make up their own mind about it. So, full disclosure, I guess, is what I'm arguing for.
Right. Well, you are the editor of Editor and Publisher. It only makes sense, I guess.
Well, I don't know, the whole controversy over sources now and confidential sources, I don't know. It's a complicated question.
Okay, now, back to the question of motivation here. You quote Harry Truman as saying they have been repaid manyfold for what they did to us, which is clearly just simple vengeance on the part of a sick mass murderer type. But then, of course, we have the myth that we're all brought up with that this was a terrible thing, but pragmatically speaking, it was necessary because a land invasion would have been so much worse. And a land invasion definitely would have happened if we hadn't dropped those bombs.
Right. Well, there's no question a land invasion was planned. And there's no question that it would have been bad or could have been bad. But it was planned for months later. I believe it was December or even later, early in 46. And so it was many months off. If we hadn't dropped the bomb, would we have had to invade? It's possible. No question about it. I think what divides people is this feeling that it was okay to use the bomb because of Pearl Harbor and the many, many losses that the U.S. suffered throughout that war. And it's hard to put ourselves back in that situation. And everyone knows Japan was the aggressor and had done many terrible things. And there's no question about that. Nevertheless, if you want to say, well, we should be a little different, or, America doesn't just incinerate civilians. America just doesn't kill, 200,000 people because we could. We should have gone the extra mile, I guess that's what the argument comes down to. Because as I said, you really don't know what might have happened. You know there's good arguments on both sides, but for me, the clinching argument is for Americans or for my country, did we go the extra mile? Did we do everything possible before dropping the bomb? And to me, we didn't. And that's what separates some views from others, I think.
Well, and, when you take the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and you combine that with the firebombing of almost all the rest of the cities in Japan and of Dresden and other cities in Europe, it sort of really pokes a big hole in the whole we are, American Superman and everything we do is moral, and World War II is supposed to be this cut and dry black and white case of good versus evil, right. America versus the evil Nazis and the evil imperialist Japanese, and yet are we really any better than the Nazis going around dropping bombs on cities full of civilians?
Right. It's a good moral question, although, again, we have to differentiate between the Nazis or the Japanese who were the aggressors in the war and what they did. So I think there's ways to raise questions about what America did. There's ways to raise questions about hypocrisy and America self-righteousness without equating us with the Nazis or the Imperial Japan. That said, certainly, there's a lot of questions about this turning point in history when it became morally acceptable to firebomb cities and kill tens of thousands in a single night of civilians, from the air. And, it became accepted in the war because there was so much carnage on all sides. And, the feeling that anything goes. And, it's hard to step back in time to understand that. But, that was the situation at the time. But there were people, many people at the time, including people like John Foster Dulles, one of the great hawks of the 50s, who was appalled by this turning point in history where we were able to deliberately target. There were, the people killed particularly in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were not only overwhelmingly civilian, but they were targeted for execution or extermination. That's what we wanted to do. We dropped the bomb directly over the center of the city in Hiroshima. I've been there. I've seen what it looks like. See where a bomb would go off. It's guaranteed to wipe out everyone. And it's a chilling feeling, no matter what you may feel about the decision to use the bomb and how bad the Japanese were. I think even an American soldier who feels his life was saved by the bomb, and he may not be wrong, but all these many Japanese or American veterans who do feel the bomb saved their lives, I think even if they went to Hiroshima and stood on a hill overlooking the city and could kind of imagine this bomb going off directly over the city in this bowl. It's a city twined with mountains all around it, and it was deliberately done to kill as many as possible. I think they would feel qualms if they picture that and imagine all this life down below wiped out. It's a difficult thing morally to accept. People can accept it, and maybe they're even right, but it's a very difficult moral thing to accept when you see it, and you imagine deliberately targeting 100,000 or 150,000 people in that 1 second for death.
Right, and I should be more careful when I go throwing around words like "we," because I wasn't born until 1976, and I'm sure not responsible for the actions of Harry Truman or his little brain trust that told him what to do up there. So Truman might be a Nazi, but that doesn't make America Nazis.
Okay.
All right, everybody, we'll be right back with Greg Mitchell. He's the author of Hiroshima in America. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Weekend Interview Show. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm talking with Greg Mitchell from editor and publisher. And he's the author of a book, Hiroshima in America. His article, The Press in Hiroshima, August 6, 1945, is today's spotlight up at antiwar.com. And in the last couple of minutes here, we got about 7 minutes. Can you please tell me a little bit about W.L. Lawrence, the New York Times reporter, and what his role in the Manhattan Project was?
Okay. Well, we hear a lot about embedded reporters today in Iraq, and this guy was the ultimate embedded reporter. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the New York Times, a science reporter. He was, he volunteered or was taken into the Manhattan Project that was building the bomb to document what was going on and basically to write the press releases or articles that would be released the minute or the day the bomb was used. And so Lawrence, for a couple of years, traveled around the country and wrote these articles, I think there were 14 in number, about all facets of building the bomb, where it was built and how and who the people were and so forth. And so that when the bomb was set off exactly 60 years ago today, government, the Pentagon, had ready these very persuasive articles about the project that glorified really the building and the use of the bomb. And then Lawrence was a couple days later was able to go on the Nagasaki mission. He was the only reporter who was on that mission, and then he wrote about that. And of course this was all subject to Pentagon approval and editing and so forth. And of course the articles were, some of the articles about the actual process where the bomb was built and everything were straight journalism, science type of things, step by step. I suppose is wrong with that. But some of the articles, and certainly his description of the first atomic test in New Mexico, which glorified the bomb and the mushroom cloud with religious symbolism, and then his account of the use of the bomb and the Nagasaki mission, and then other aspects immediately after Hiroshima of radiation. He sort of poo-pooed the radiation dangers, things like that. So the problem is, here was a guy for the New York Times who also was really working for the government, and he was accepted as a great journalist, and he had tremendous impact on how the public perceived and was introduced to the bomb.
Yeah, that's funny. He's almost like the Judith Miller, full of WMD lies.
Well, there's
in the
actually
1940s.
A movement now. I know Amy Goodman is now launching a campaign to have his Pulitzer taken away from him. So I probably won't get very far, but it's an interesting project. It's
actually kind of fun to read, and in fact, always I've enjoyed old propaganda, old movie tone news footage from the 40s and 50s and stuff,
right,
because it's so much more sophisticated nowadays. We all have grown up on all these TV commercials, and we're all so cynical that they have to really try hard to manipulate us now.
Yep.
Whereas back then, they just laid it out. And I have one of these quotes here from Lawrence. He said, the nuclear bomb has opened a new promised land of wealth, health, and happiness for all mankind.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this is a giant bomb that just killed 200,000 people. What is he talking about?
Well, that was being promised to, if you support nuclear power, I mean, okay, that has happened. We ended up with nuclear submarines, nuclear energy. He wasn't completely wrong. There certainly had been so-called peaceful uses of nuclear energy that have benefited society, some people would say. But of course, he got carried away and didn't see the downside of all this. And I guess that's my problem with the use of the bomb, beyond whether it had to be used at the time, was all the negative effects that have followed. With people kind of forget not only the nuclear arms race, but which we've survived somehow, but what that did to the country, our focus on all that element, the terror that people felt for so many decades, and the cost, the unfathomable trillions and trillions of dollars that it cost the thousands, millions of workers exposed to radiation in their work, the horrendous nuclear experiments on people that we read so much about a few years ago, so many people who were killed or injured by nuclear experiments, atomic testing in the atmosphere, which killed tens of thousands, and delayed effects, according to estimates that I know you were fortunately born after that, but for those of us who grew up in the 50s, we were subjected to a tremendous amount of fallout from the sky, and then on and on. We could another 10 minutes talking about all the negative effects. So even if there were positive effects of this invention, there also were tremendous negative effects, and that has to be factored in. And when you talk about Hiroshima, you talk about how that set the stage for everything that followed.
Yep, and I really wish that we had more time to talk about it. We're almost out of time. One of the quotes I wanted to bring up here right before the end was you quote a guy named Dr. Harold Agnew as saying there are no innocent civilians in war. And I guess from my point of view, that's the number one reason to oppose war, is that kind of collectivist thinking. But anyway, that's it. Music's playing, so we're all out. Thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Mitchell. I appreciate it. Everybody go to editorandpublisher.com. It's an excellent website for many reasons. Check it out. We'll be right back.
Don't take your guns to town.